Good afternoon. I am back with more advice on how to complete the internal assessment. So I'm going to start with sections 1 and 2, actually, and research materials. Research materials that are appropriate for a paper of this magnitude. And remember, your IB score will depend largely on the score you get on the internal assessment. And it will not be my score that will ultimately give you that IB score. An IB moderator who will grade your paper. It is that person's score that counts. So we want to impress the moderator, not Mr. Richard, someone who doesn't know you, someone who has not read your paper before, and will be determining your IB score based on what that person reads. So, let's start with something that I'm seeing that is bothersome. In sections 1 and 2, I am seeing identification of encyclopedias as a source to evaluate. No. And I am seeing excessive citation of encyclopedias in section 2. No. In fact, when I go to the source list on some of these drafts, I'm seeing 2, sometimes 3 encyclopedias. Britannica. No. I know that when we looked at the model internal assessment, the first one, we did note that that candidate did use an encyclopedic source to access a chronology of events for Watergate. That was referenced once. So, let's assume that you are writing your investigation on the failures of the Schlieffen Plan. And this is how Germany got itself bogged down in a two-front war. You're investigating something with that. And you got the particular details about the Schlieffen Plan in an encyclopedia. You found that in Britannica. Okay, but is it possible that you could have found that exact same information about the Schlieffen Plan in a source like this? Probably. So, if you are in that predicament where you need background information on the Schlieffen Plan, you found it in Britannica, but you're citing that Encyclopedia Britannica several times. No. Encyclopedias are not strong research tools. I can guarantee you, you will probably not find them on the college campus next year, and I can guarantee you any college professor will fail a paper written from Britannica. So, if you can find that piece of background information in another source, like this one, The Great War, 1914 to 1918, by noted historian Spencer Tucker. Notice I've used this a lot. It's narrative with analysis. It gives background knowledge on what I need to know about the Schlieffen Plan, why it failed, and its consequences. I'm going to get rid of those Britannica references, and I'm going to use this. I'm going to advise that you do the same thing. If you absolutely cannot find that piece of information that you need in section 2, and you must go to that one reference to Britannica, I guess that's okay. Avoid it if you can. If you have it referenced numerous times, if you have Britannica listed 3 times in your source list, get rid of it. Not good. We definitely do not want to identify Britannica as a source that will be evaluated for the paper. Because as I've been reading, a limitation on the value of Britannica, it's not analytical. Don't do it. Okay? Now, here's another piece that I've noticed, and that's because I've been spot checking sources. Oh yes, I have. I've been clicking links, checking them twice, and sometimes I don't like what I see. So here's another situation of my paper's about, I'm investigating the Schlieffen Plan, the failures of that plan, and how it led to a 2-front war in which Germany was destined to lose. And I find a source that gives me an excerpt, maybe 5 paragraphs, about the Schlieffen Plan. And that's it. Just that one paragraph. And those are usually linked to Spartacus or an encyclopedic source. That one paragraph. Are you going to identify that as the source that's driving section 2? No. Think of it as going to the World War I museum and walking out with a pamphlet. Would you use this pamphlet to write your term paper? That's what an excerpt would do. What you would get from a pamphlet is what you would get from that excerpt. Not much. All right, these are college level papers. That moderator wants to see college level research materials. Not a pamphlet and not Britannica. All right. So let's move on to Section 1, limitations on the values of your sources. I know I discussed this several times. In fact, that was the focus of the last video. Get away from the comfort zones with especially the limitations. The comfort zone I'm talking about. Historian wasn't alive when it happened. You don't know what everyone in Germany thought about the Schlieffen Plan. If the source is about, so say you have an article by a historian from a journal of history, and the focus is exclusively the Schlieffen Plan, a limitation on the value of that source wouldn't be it only focuses on the Schlieffen Plan, because that was the purpose of the source. Push yourself to really think about values and limitations. Think about those reflection questions, those activator questions, when you're trying to pick up on limitations. If you know your sources very well, and remember, go back to the module in planning for the document-based essay. And one of the organizing strategies was to summarize the evidence from the sources. Identify the 2 sources where the evidence is really coming forward. Maybe I'm going to this several times for information about the Schlieffen Plan, for example. And I suggested when you're done summarizing your evidence, put stars next to the sources that seem to be driving section 2. So limitations might be really, this is based on newly released classified information, archived information that it had been difficult to access. Does that change perspectives on history, on the historian's work? That's where you want to go. Look at the date your work was published. If it was published 2 years ago, is this new material the historian is releasing? Is it based on new material? Has that historian rejected traditional interpretations of the Schlieffen Plan and its failures? And if so, do other historians corroborate, support that new theory? If that's the case, then there's your limitations. It's very recent. Corroborating support for that point of view at this time may be a little bit of a challenge. Not impossible, but certainly if this historian is going to undo traditional theories of history that had been supported for 80 years, a lot of support for the traditional view, the revisionist view, other historians are coming around to accepting it or rejecting it. Maybe that's a challenge or a task that you need to undertake. I need to find out if this source, I've had to find out if this has been corroborated. So think in those terms, okay? Certainly do not suggest the source is not trustworthy. You will not get higher than 2 marks out of 6 for section 1. So don't go there. All right, let's talk about, I'm going to present something that might be important for those of you working with data, statistics, examples of government-issued propaganda, maps if you're doing war strategies, and that's the appendix or appendices of information. This would be something you would do in section 2. Let's say that you are researching food shortages in Germany during World War I. And your research has pulled up in your research availability of certain food products, maybe potatoes, wheat, other food items in 1914. And then the same research presents that by 1918, those staples like potatoes, like wheat, by 1918, the availability of those food items had decreased dramatically. And that data will drive the investigation in section 2. And you want the reader to see that table of statistics. What you would do in section 2, you would present give me a minute here. So in your paper, you would say something along these lines. Declining food supplies were noted in certain staples between 1914 and 1918, and then you would direct the reader to go to Appendix 1 in parentheses. You would then after your bibliography, so you're going to write sections 1, sections 2, section 3, bibliography, and then you're going to present your appendix. Appendix 1 and my table. Okay. So, bibliography, I would go to the appendix to see tables 1 and 2. If you decide to do that, and that would be a good way of presenting data. It really strengthens your investigation in section 2. So I would go to Appendix 1. I would see the tables. But tell me, why am I going to Appendix 1? So under your tables 1 and 2, in which I see the decline in availability of food in Germany between 1914 and 1918, I would caption the table and then provide a citation. Right, so caption your appendix explaining to the reader what he or she is looking at. Right, so tables 1 and 2, your caption would be, this data presents the dramatic decline in food items between 1914 and 1918 in Germany, and then cite the source where you got the data, you got the statistics. Cite your source. Okay? You could do that with a map. You could do that with art. All right? So if that's appropriate for your paper, don't add that on there thinking it's like bling. I'm going to accessorize my paper with needless appendices. That won't work. Right? So you can have more than one. So Appendix 1 is a table of food shortages, and then Appendix 2 maybe a map of the naval blockade of the German ports, and then you would present your map with a caption. This is the visual presentation of the naval blockade of German ports between 1915 and 1918, demonstrating the inability of the German government to access food supplies from its colonies. That's your caption. And then under that, the citation of where you got the map, a footnote. You would be footnoting it. All right? Appendixed information does not count in the word count. So that is not a way to make up 500 words in your paper. Whatever you put in the appendix, that is outside of the word count. Keep that in mind. So, again, if you were working with topics in which you know you're going to be providing data, and it's very difficult to present numbers in text form. And you really want the reader to see the decline in the food supply, the rapid increase of the arms race between the great powers in 1913. You want the reader to see just how complicated the Schlieffen Plan was, whatever it is, whatever you're trying to present to the reader. It's complicated to explain on paper. It makes it clearer if you can see the map, if you can see the data, if you can see. The appendix is the way to do it. It is after the bibliography, after the entire paper. Okay? All right. We've covered section, so that's what I wanted to mention with section 2. And of course, we're not writing papers from encyclopedias. No. All right, so now we go to the source list. Those need to be really, really perfect. All right, so be certain you're formatting it correctly. It has to be alphabetized. The source list has to be alphabetized. Try to work with the spacing. Some of the source lists that I read, everything's double spaced. And so I don't know where source number 1 stops and source number 2 begins. Really tighten that up because, again, challenge that moderator to find reasons to deduct points from your paper. Don't let sloppy errors get in the way of maximizing your score. Right? That source list is very, very important. All right, so that's what I wanted to present today in regard to the internal assessment. And we'll continue to work with this in class. Keep working on those IAs. We can all do very well on this if we really think clearly about how we're going to write this paper. Think of it as going on a job interview. Think of it as going on a job interview, and this paper is what the boss sees. What impression would that moderator, that boss, have by reading your, would you get hired if the boss read that paper? Think of it that way, okay? Or think of it this way. You're going on a job interview, but you're dressed in flip-flops, a tank top, and wet hair. If your paper is sloppy, it's as though you're presenting yourself for an interview dressed in a tank top, flip-flops, and wet hair. You probably wouldn't get the job. So sloppy bibliography, papers written from encyclopedias, identifying sources in which you say not trustworthy, and it's a pamphlet, tank top, flip-flops, and wet hair. That paper's not going anywhere. Right, so you can do it, but you've got to work on this, and you really, really challenge yourselves to produce quality analysis. You can do it. We've done this in class. So you apply it to your own work. All right, see you in class. Bye.